This is a Voyescape podcast. You can find all of our travel podcasts from around the world at voyescape.com.
Welcome to this week's edition of Travel in 10, and we're going somewhere a little bit more unique this week. We're traveling to Brazil and going to a place that I think is on a lot of people's bucket list, traveling to the heart of the Amazon. Tim has had an opportunity to go on an incredible cruise ship there, an exploration ship, really getting into the heart of the Amazon and exploring it, and we're going to get into a little bit of a discussion of that today. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks so much, David. Great to see you this week, and can't wait to talk about this amazing journey. So I had two full weeks. I've been to the Amazon and a couple other countries. This was completely in Brazil, but 2 weeks on the Amazon River on a purpose-built expedition ship called Seabourn Venture, and it was just an absolutely beautiful ship.
Do you want to maybe paint the picture a little bit? So when you say an expedition ship, like how many people are we talking about that would be on a ship like this? What makes it different from a typical cruise?
Yeah, good question. So expedition ships tend to spend a lot of their time in the polar region. So Antarctica and the Arctic. And if I understand correctly, I think I do. This ship was actually making a transit from the Arctic. So it was going from Greenland all the way down the coast of North America through the Caribbean, actually boarded in the Caribbean, and then 2 weeks in the Amazon, and then continued south, ultimately to Antarctica. And so expedition ships in general tend to be small. They tend to be between 200 and 300 people because of regulations. When you're in Antarctica, you can only have 100 guests off the ship at a time. So it doesn't make sense to, if you're doing landings in Antarctica, to have larger ships. So this particular ship had just 264 max capacity. I think we had even less than that, so felt nice and roomy. And this was, one of the nicest, most luxurious expedition ships that I've been on. So it had all the things that made it an expedition ship, which is it had Zodiacs, it had which are these sort of rubber boats, these small rubber boats that you get on. They're very sturdy. And they can take you almost anywhere. So if you're in the polar regions, you get on a Zodiac, you go see icebergs, and you go see polar bears in the north, or whales and seals and penguins in the south. And in the Amazon, we would get on these Zodiacs every day, and we would cruise around, and we would see little villages, and we would see the wildlife there. And so it was equipped with all of those things that make it an expedition ship, but it was a luxury expedition ship. So even the entry-level cabin, I was in the entry-level cabin. It's called a veranda suite. Was 355 square feet. So if you think, the size of a hotel, a large hotel room, or a decent sized hotel room, 75 square foot balcony, had its own big walk-in closet. And, as we've discussed on the podcast before, I'm a man who loves a bath and a bathtub. The bathroom, the washroom actually had the separated shower and deep soaker bathtub, and that was the entry level suite. So it had a lot of the luxuries that you might get on a traditional luxury small ship, but it was purpose built to have all of these other amenities that make it an expedition ship. And that small size means that you get to know a lot of people on board as well. So really a beautiful ship, and a great way to sail on the Amazon.
So that type of a ship, I mean, you can just talk a little bit about the facilities. Are you going to have things like, are you going to have a pool? Are you going to have multiple restaurants, or what sort of the facilities on board look like on a ship like that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a very good question. So they have a full service spa. They have a small swimming pool, but certainly plenty big enough, to go for a dip. And then they had two lovely, I think I had four actually, jacuzzis that were two for sure that were off the stern. So you could sit in the jacuzzi and just watch as the river rolled out behind the ship as you made your way down the river. And it's not going to be the kind of ship, you think about one of these large ships that has 14 restaurants or 16 restaurants or whatever. That is not what this is. But they had a beautiful, they basically, in addition to room service, they had, I believe, two main dining venues. So the main dining room, which I believe they call the restaurant, um, just simply the restaurant, which is like a multi-course formal dining room, although you didn't have to be formal because it was an expedition. So I wore jeans every single night and that was not a problem. And then they had a second venue called the Colonnade. That was a little bit more informal, buffet style breakfast and lunch, and then you had a served dinner, but it wasn't quite as formal. And then they did have one other cafe where you could go get like, I'm not an early morning person. Most mornings I didn't get up in time for breakfast, so I would just go and get a couple little sandwiches and a coffee at this other small venue that they had. So enough that you had variety and you could move around, but not what you think in terms of 16, 17 restaurants, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And what does like programming and activities look like? I'm assuming going into being on an expedition ship and going somewhere like the Amazon, you probably have some naturalists or other experts on board. But what does the programming look like?
That, I think, is the biggest thing that distinguishes an expedition ship from another type of cruise ship is the fact that they have a whole expedition team on board. So you have an expedition leader, who in this case was a very personable, very knowledgeable guy named Iggy Rojas. He was, I believe, Chilean by birth, had lived in Brazil for many, many years, of course, spoke Portuguese. And every night he's been a couple decades in the living in the Amazon, I believe, doing scientific research and also doing tourism in the Amazon. And every night, we would gather. Usually it was like 5:30 before dinner, and they would do a briefing. And so each of the guides, there would be a bird expert, there would be a marine expert, and they would get up a geologist and they would give a little talk about what we had seen that day, what we were going to expect to see the next day, and then and then sort of the grand finale of those briefings was Iggy, the expedition leader, getting up and laying out the plan for the next day. Because so many, especially when you're in the polar regions, but even in the Amazon, when you're on an expedition cruise, the weather dictates everything, the conditions dictate everything, and so the plan, they say you might have plan A, B, C, D, and D, and maybe it's not even any of those, depending on the weather. And so yes, so there was a really excellent expedition team on board this ship, and every night we would gather and have, rather than having Broadway style shows and things like that, we would have these briefings telling us what exciting thing we were going to do the next day, and we had lots of exciting things that we did.
I would love that. That would be for me. That's like totally sounds like my type. Way more interesting than a typical cruise to be like much more educational and immersive and really getting into what you're going to see. I'm curious. I mean, being 250 people, that's quite a few people to get out and doing wildlife viewing and stuff. How did that part work? And did you see a lot in terms of wildlife going down the Amazon?
Yeah, we did, absolutely. And so in answer to your first question, which is a very good question, they will split you, and this is typical also in Antarctica or the Arctic when you cruise there. They split you into basically teams. In our case, I believe on board this ship we had 4 teams, and sometimes they're designated by color. Sometimes it's like an animal that so you might have like if you're in Antarctica, it might be penguins and seals and whales and whatever. And so then they rotate you. And so they'll say, okay, first we're going to have penguins, go at 7 o'clock. And then we had quite early mornings because it was very, very hot when we were in the Amazon. So, 7 o'clock in the morning for penguins. And it wasn't in the Amazon, wasn't penguins. Let's substitute dolphins and, sloths and monkeys, whatever. And they would split us into groups, and then we would go out according to our color group or our animal group, and they would keep a rotation going with the Zodiacs. And I mean, you think about the Amazon, it is so much bigger. I've been to the Amazon a few times. It is so much bigger than you can ever imagine. I mean, I wrote down a couple numbers: 6.7 million square kilometers. They estimate about 400 billion trees in the Amazon rainforest. It covers parts of 8 countries. It's the Amazon River is the world's largest river by volume. And so, and we saw a lot. Um, we saw pink dolphins, which is the famous and strange and wonderful thing that you hope to see in the Amazon. And we saw glimpses of them when we were in the Zodiac, so we were quite close to them, which was very, very cool. Toucans and other, a lot of different waterfowl. And then we also went fishing for piranhas, which is one of the famous, fun things that you can do there. So baited the hook with raw ground chuck, whatever, beef, and dipped it into the water, and I personally didn't pull one up, but we did have some in the boat. But you definitely, I mean, it's almost like something from a horror movie, because you drop that hook into the water and your line just shakes, because you can feel all of these little tiny, these fish with these teeth, just fighting for that little bit of meat. So many times you'd pull your line up and it would be just clean as a whistle, right? But so you could feel the fact that there were all these piranhas down there. So that was very interesting. But I think it was the human side of the Amazon that surprised me the most on this journey.
In what way? What was unique about that?
So, I mean, so the Amazon, I think when we picture the Amazon, and certainly many parts of the Amazon are like this, I think we picture this sort of vast, uninterrupted, um, jungle, that just goes on and on and on and on, and you can never, get to the end of it. And that's true. I mean, I think that there are certainly places in the Amazon that we can't even wrap our minds around how huge they are and how unpopulated they are. This particular part of the Amazon, we came down the Atlantic coast. We came out of the Caribbean, sailed down the Atlantic coast, and then sailed in through the mouth of the Amazon. That alone was interesting, because we went from this kind of almost aquamarine ocean water, salt water, and then into the brown water. I mean, it's a brown river, the Amazon River. Um, and you would almost have strips of water. So you'd have the aquamarine and the brown, the aquamarine and the brown, until you made that full transition. And at its widest, at the end of the Amazon there, it is a river that's so wide that it almost feels like you can almost not see from end to end when that's how wide it is, out the sides of the ship. But once you get in, and a lot of our trips, our expedition trips, yes, focused on wildlife, but a lot of them were focused on seeing life on the river, human life on the river. And it was very, very interesting. Because the Amazon River is the superhighway of that rainforest. There are very few roads that connect the cities. Manaus, I believe, is which is the largest city in the Amazon, is basically unconnected. So millions of people there unconnected by road. So people travel up and down that river it's the superhighway. And so we would see uh, these wooden 2-3 story boats that were traveling up and down, and people in hammocks. These are multi-day trips going from city to city. And that was fascinating, all the way down to going to little villages where people lived in these very lovely, well-kept homes. They live simple lives. Our Iggy and the other guides would say they live simple lives, but most of them are very happy, and they fish, and they have gardens, out back to grow root vegetables and other things like that. And a moment that I'll never forget was, well, a couple. One was, we were in a little side river off the main river, in a little cluster of houses, and this boat came along. It was very vividly painted, um, and there were a lot of sort of teenagers on the boat. And I said, "What's this boat? Where it's going on here?" And they said, "Oh, that's the school bus." They had these wooden boats that would come around in the morning and pick up the kids, and they would take them to school. And this must maybe was a high school because the kids looked like they were older. Take them over to the high school, and they have their classes all day, and then they get back on the boat, and the boat takes them back. And there's never a car or a wheeled vehicle that's involved at all. And then one of the other things, and we saw, young women fishing for shrimp. We saw a guy who was fishing, holding up his catch, very proud of it. One cool moment was, I think the Brazilian government has put money into getting a lot of these homes on the river connected to the internet. So even though you think you're in many ways in one of the most remote places in the world, I mean, we're on the Amazon, we're in the middle of the rainforest in the Amazon. A lot of these places do have internet, satellite internet connections. And a guy came around, and I think he was selling acai, this superfood that they have. And he was going to sell a bag of it to this family that we've been visiting with on the shore. And I thought, I think it's going to be this. Clearly, it's going to be a cash transaction. But they both got their phones out, and the one transferred money online to the guy in the wooden boat with the acai, selling it door to door. And I just thought, what an interesting clash of not just cultures, but but eras. You have people living maybe as they've lived for centuries, fishing and farming on the river, but they're also buying things, using satellite internet in their phones. So that was very cool. And I just have one more experience to share that I think is really worth talking about. So I mean, there were a million. I could talk for we could spend an hour, we could spend 2 hours. I mean, even just life on the ship and things that we did on the seaboard venture. But um we went to a town called Parintins. I've been to Brazil before. I'd never heard of this town. Mid-sized, smallish kind of city. I don't know how many people live in Parintins, but maybe, I don't know, it felt like maybe 2 or 300,000, something like that, maybe less, maybe more. But they have a festival there that's called Boi Bumbá, and every year it's like a theatrical retelling of a story of a resurrected ox. I didn't quite understand the full story, but this is a huge event in the town. They actually built a stadium that looks like a football stadium to house this festival. And there's a red team and a blue team. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Portuguese names of these teams, but red and blue. And they have their training ground. You're either red or blue. You train through the year, and then they have this festival that draws thousands and thousands of people singing and dancing and just beautiful, beautiful, colorful costumes. And really, honestly, one of the highlights of the trip was they did like a small version, like a 1 hour version for us and off the ship just for us. And I mean, David, I mean, you and I've done a lot of travel, and we've been to a lot of these folklore shows, that they do for tourists. And that is honestly what I was expecting. I didn't even sign up at first for the show. Um, and I would have missed the highlight. It was absolutely spectacular. I mean, the costumes, I can't even describe it, but the dancing and the costumes and the singing, you had, beautiful women on riding these giant pink dolphins and hanging below monarch butterflies. And, it was just a taste of it, but I know everybody came out of that. I mean, people were talking about that for days and for weeks afterwards. I mean, this was not your run of the mill folklore show, and the passion of the people performing it, like, it didn't feel like, okay, they're giving us this money and we're going to do it for the people on this cruise ship. It was, they were so proud to show us, give us just a little glimpse of what this festival is all about. And so Boy Bomba was one of the big highlights and one of the big surprises, to be honest. So really, yeah, really
Uh,
special.
I mean, sounds like an incredible, incredible trip.
It was.
Two last questions I would have is one. I mean, I know this was part of a longer voyage on the expedition ship, where you were on there for quite a while, going everywhere from Antarctica to the Caribbean. It was a long trip that you did. But can people join for just the Amazon portion? Would be one question. And also, I mean, this is a pretty high end ship. I know we were talking a fair bit while you were on board. Very much a luxury experience. Any sense of like what the approximate cost for a trip like this would be as well?
I'm going to demur on the cost because I know sometimes it varies wildly based on your cabin type,
Sure.
which voyage you select. So I'm going to demur on that one, but yes, you can do the Amazon portion. I don't know what exactly they have planned for next year, because again, it'll be about the same time of year next year and they'll do it again. The voyage that I did began in the Caribbean. So I got on the ship in Barbados. We did a few stops in the Caribbean, and then we did a week on the Amazon. What happened after that was most people got off the ship except for 50. So I mean, probably a quarter to a third that we actually had, because it wasn't full capacity at the time, got off the ship. We had new guests come on, and then we went back into the Amazon and spent another week in the Amazon, and then finished the trip went down the coast to Rio de Janeiro. So you can do, we had people on the ship, there was a couple from Texas that I ended up hanging out with a lot. They had gotten on the ship in Greenland, and they had sailed all the way down to Newfoundland, all the way down the coast of North America, all the way through the Caribbean, and they got off in Rio. So they've been on the ship for months and months. But for sure, I think the minimum for the voyage that I was on was 2 weeks. So you do either Caribbean and the Amazon, or then Amazon and the coast of Brazil down to Rio de Janeiro. But really spectacular. Definitely recommend it. Beautiful ship, beautiful voyage.
Sounds incredible. And I imagine that in addition to the human aspect of the people who you met on shore, must have been some incredible passengers and stuff too. I mean, people who are really into immersive travel and getting to some more exotic and more adventurous destinations like Antarctica and the Amazon. So I can only imagine what the experience was like. But hopefully we can talk Seabourn into letting us come do some live recording of future episodes on one of their ships or something. It does sound like it would be an incredible trip.
Absolutely. I'm always happy to sail Seabourn. It's a beautiful cruise line, and this was just an incredible journey. So, yeah, and you're absolutely right. I feel like it's a self-selecting crowd when you go on a slightly unusual expedition style journey. I mean, I think honestly, I think interesting people choose interesting trips, and so there are definitely, lots of people that you would bump into, and everybody had a story. So about their past travels, about their lives. And, yeah, so that was definitely part of the highlights.
Terrific. Well, as always, we hope everyone will come back next week for our next adventure around the world. And if you're enjoying, some of the travel tips and travel information that we're sharing, hugely helpful to us. If you can go on to the Apple Podcast Store, Spotify, wherever you're getting a podcast, and drop us a rating or review, and check out all of our podcasts from around the world with all of our podcasting partners at voyescape.com, who are part of the Voyescape Podcast Network.
Always great to chat with you, David. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tim. For hilarious and inspiring travel stories, check out Travel Tales with Mike Siegel. As a comedian and TV host, he's got some of the best travel stories out there. Find it at voyescape.com.